The call came after the check cleared. The painting was already hanging, quiet room, soft light, serious money on the wall. It was supposed to be a lost work, private collection, never seen. The kind of story that only circulates among people who already believe they belong. No catalog, no paper trail that could survive daylight. Just trust, reputation, and a gallery that had been selling certainty for more than a century. No alarms went off. Not then. The brushwork looked right if you wanted it to. The surface felt old enough. The price said it had to be real. Everyone in the room understood the rules. Ask too many questions and you were admitting you did not deserve the answer. Months later, doubt crept in through chemistry, not taste. Pigments told a different story. So did the paper. The confidence drained fast. What followed was not a mystery of art. It was a test of power, prestige, and how long a lie can survive when everyone profits from believing it. Prestige without proof. The doors of Knoedler Gallery opened each morning the same way they had for more than a century. Quiet, controlled, polite. Inside, the walls carried authority, the kind that did not need to explain itself. Founded in the 19th century, Knoedler was not just a gallery, it was an institution. Presidents bought there, museums trusted it, collectors treated its word as currency. If something hung on those walls, the assumption was simple. It had already been questioned by people more qualified than you. That reputation did most of the work. By the early 2000s, the gallery was under new leadership and facing a changed market. Blue-chip art had become financial armor. Buyers were less interested in beauty than certainty. They wanted works that could not fail, names that only went up. That was the opening. Around this time, a woman named Glafira Rosales began appearing quietly in the orbit of the gallery. She did not look like a power broker. She did not act like one either. Soft-spoken, careful, always deferential. She presented herself as an intermediary for a private collector who valued discretion above all else. Her story was consistent. The collector was foreign, Swiss, she said, reclusive, old money. He had acquired important works decades earlier and never shown them. He did not trust institutions. He did not want publicity. He only wanted the right home and the right price. And he wanted to sell quietly. That explanation fit perfectly. Lost works were the most valuable kind. They came with mystery baked in. No public history meant no public doubt. Provenance was thin, but that thinness was framed as a feature, not a flaw. Rosales brought paintings attributed to giants of 20th century American art. Works said to be by Mark Rothko, others attributed to Jackson Pollock, names that did not need introductions. The gallery did not announce them. They were shown privately, back rooms, select clients, collectors who understood that asking for too much documentation could get you cut out of the room entirely. The paintings came without exhibition histories, no catalog entries, no photographs from earlier decades. That should have been a problem. Instead, it became the story. These were works the artists had never released publicly. Experimental, transitional, pieces that explained gaps in their known output. That explanation was seductive. It offered not just ownership, but discovery. The gallery sought opinions, but carefully. Informal consultations, trusted eyes, people who knew the language of these artists well enough to recognize a convincing accent. Some experts raised mild concerns, others did not. No one issued a definitive rejection early on. Crucially, no one demanded invasive testing. Scientific analysis costs time and risks embarrassment. If tests came back wrong, the gallery would be forced to explain why it had doubted itself in the first place. There was also another pressure, less discussed but more powerful. If the works were real, questioning them too aggressively could cost millions. So the process stayed soft. Visual assessments, stylistic conversations, comfort checks rather than hard proof. The gallery accepted the explanation that the collector's secrecy accounted for the missing history. Sales followed. Collectors paid millions, in some cases tens of millions. They were buying more than paint. They were buying entry, buying association, buying the reassurance that comes from aligning with an institution that had never steered them wrong before. The checks cleared, the paintings left the gallery, walls filled elsewhere, insurance policies were written, loans were discussed. Inside the gallery, the operation looked clean, contracts were drawn, records were kept, commissions were paid. On paper, everything appeared normal. But the foundation was thin. No one ever met the collector. No one saw storage facilities. No shipping records from Europe surfaced. No old invoices, no customs documents. Every gap was explained the same way. Privacy, distrust, old money habits. Those explanations worked because everyone involved wanted them to. Prestige has a silencing effect. It discourages skepticism by framing it as ignorance. In this environment, doubt becomes a social risk. Ask the wrong question, and you reveal yourself as someone who does not belong. That pressure applied to buyers and to the gallery itself. As sales continued, the story hardened. The works became accepted through repetition. Each successful transaction made the next one easier. Each satisfied buyer became silent confirmation. This was not a case of one dramatic lie. It was a slow normalization of uncertainty. Behind the scenes, Rosales remained steady. She did not flaunt wealth. She did not push aggressively. She let the gallery set prices. She deferred to their authority. That posture made her seem harmless. The gallery, in turn, treated her as a conduit, not a creator of risk. She was the messenger. The source remained conveniently out of reach. This arrangement benefited everyone in the room. The gallery earned commissions that rivaled entire years of traditional sales. Collectors acquired rare works with upside potential. Intermediaries collected their share quietly. What no one did was step back and ask the most basic question. What if the story itself was the product? By the time the first serious doubts began to surface, the paintings had already done their work. They had moved money. They had reinforced reputations. They had embedded themselves into collections that now depended on them being real. At that point, disbelief was no longer neutral. It was dangerous. This was the trap. Prestige had replaced proof. Authority had replaced evidence. The oldest gallery in New York had accepted the idea that trust, once earned, did not need to be re-earned. The lie did not need to be perfect. It only needed to be good enough for people who could not afford to be wrong. Chapter 2. The paint, the paper, the lie. Doubt did not arrive loudly. It seeped in through side conversations and quiet reviews. A conservator looked too long at a surface. A dealer hesitated over a texture that felt rehearsed. Nothing explosive, just friction. At first, the questions stayed private. That was the etiquette. No one wanted to be the person who challenged a major gallery in public and turned out to be wrong. In the art world, reputation is a currency that does not regenerate easily. But the unease grew. Some of the paintings felt too intact, too confident. Abstract expressionism was supposed to be volatile, risky. These works looked like they knew exactly what they were trying to be. That was not proof, just a feeling. Still, feelings matter in a market built on taste. A few buyers began asking for more documentation, not publicly, quietly. They wanted deeper verification before lending works to museums or using them as collateral. That request forced a shift. Opinions were no longer enough. Scientific testing entered the conversation. This was the moment the balance tipped. When conservators examined the materials more closely, the story started to crack. Pigments revealed chemical signatures that did not exist during the years the paintings were supposed to have been made. Certain binding agents were wrong. Paper fibers pointed to modern manufacturing processes. None of this required interpretation. Chemistry does not care about prestige. The results did not suggest aging errors or restoration issues. They suggested something simpler and more damning. The works were recent. As this information circulated, disbelief gave way to panic. If one painting was wrong, the others had to be questioned. Each new test widened the blast radius. Collectors compared notes. Lawyers were consulted. Insurance companies asked for clarity that no one could provide. The gallery, faced with evidence that could not be managed through conversation, had to confront a possibility it had resisted for years. The paintings might not be misattributed. They might be fabricated. Federal investigators entered the picture once the financial scale became clear. Millions had changed hands. Wire transfers crossed state lines. The matter was no longer an internal embarrassment. It was a criminal question. Attention turned to the supply chain. The reclusive collector never materialized. No address, no bank records that matched the story. No storage facilities. The explanation that had once sounded discreet now sounded absurd. Investigators followed the intermediary. Glafira Rosales, who had spent years positioning herself as a messenger, suddenly became central. Under scrutiny, her financial situation did not align with her supposed role. Payments from the gallery and its clients had accumulated quickly. The quiet intermediary had done very well. When pressure mounted, the story shifted again. Rosales revealed the source of the paintings. They were not coming from Europe. They were coming from Queens. The artist was a man named Pei Shen-Qian, a painter trained in China who had immigrated to the United States. He was not part of the blue-chip art world. He did not exhibit in major galleries. He lived modestly. In a small garage space, he painted works in the style of some of the most valuable artists in history. He did not sign them. He did not sell them himself. He painted what he was asked to paint. According to later accounts, Rosales provided him with art books, images, and guidance. She requested works that felt plausible but undocumented. Pieces that could slide into gaps in art history without colliding with known records. Qian used modern materials. He was not attempting to replicate period chemistry. He was attempting to replicate appearance, brushwork, composition, mood. The deception did not rely on perfect forgery. It relied on the assumption that no one would look too closely. Once finished, the paintings were artificially aged, surfaces were dulled, edges were distressed, labels were attached, frames were selected to signal seriousness. From there, the works entered the art market through Rosales, who presented them as discoveries rather than creations. The scheme did not require genius, it required alignment, a skilled painter, a persuasive intermediary, a prestigious gallery willing to accept a story that benefited everyone involved. Investigators reconstructed the timeline piece by piece. They traced payments, they mapped deliveries, they compared dates. The picture that emerged was not chaotic, it was methodical. The forgeries had been introduced gradually, no flood, no sudden surge, just enough to feel rare, just enough to avoid drawing attention. That pacing mattered. Had dozens of works appeared at once, skepticism would have followed. Instead, each painting felt like an exception, a fortunate accident, a once-in-a-lifetime find. Experts were not tricked by brilliance, they were disarmed by context. The garage in Queens became a symbol of the case, but it was not the most important location. The real work happened in offices and living rooms where questions were softened and assumptions hardened. As the evidence mounted, the gallery's internal explanations unraveled. Informal consultations were exposed as insufficient. The absence of rigorous testing became impossible to defend. The paintings were removed from walls, loans were canceled, sales were frozen. The illusion collapsed faster than it had formed. For collectors, the realization was brutal. They had not just lost money, they had lost confidence, their judgment, their standing. For the art world, the implications ran deeper. This was not a case where amateurs fooled professionals through exceptional skill. It was a case where professionals chose comfort over skepticism, where trust replaced verification, where prestige functioned as a shield against scrutiny. As federal scrutiny intensified, Rosales cooperated. Her role as intermediary dissolved into a record of transactions and instructions. The painter, faced with exposure, fled the country before he could be detained. The damage was already done. Paintings that had been discussed as major discoveries were now evidence. Conversations once filled with admiration shifted to liability and blame. The question was no longer how the forgeries had been made. It was how they had been welcomed. The art itself had failed the test of time in months. The system that embraced it had failed for years. Chapter 3. Collapse, Accountability, Aftermath. The end did not come with a single verdict. It came in fragments, court filings, closed doors, settlements that spoke without admitting anything. The collapse was slow, procedural, and irreversible. Federal charges followed the evidence. Glafira Rosales pleaded guilty to multiple counts, including wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. In sworn statements, she admitted that the paintings were not inherited, not discovered, not stored in Europe. They were commissioned, ordered, delivered. She acknowledged that she had invented the story of the reclusive collector and used it consistently because it worked. Her cooperation clarified the structure of the scheme, but it did not soften its impact. The financial scale was now undeniable. More than $80 million in fraudulent sales moved through the market. Some estimates climbed higher when secondary transactions were included. The money had already scattered. Commissions paid, taxes avoided, assets hidden. The painter, Pei Shen-Qian, had already left the United States. He returned to China before charges could be filed against him. He became unreachable. His absence ensured that the case would never have a full confrontation between creator and consequence. Attention turned back to the institution that had legitimized the works. The Knoedler Gallery did not survive the scrutiny. Civil lawsuits piled up from buyers who argued that trust had been abused and diligence abandoned. They claimed they had relied on the gallery's reputation, expertise, and assurances when making their purchases. The gallery denied intentional wrongdoing. Its defense rested on the idea that it, too, had been deceived. That position satisfied no one. Courts did not need to decide whether the gallery had known the paintings were fake. The question was narrower and more damaging. Had it done enough to verify what it sold? That question lingered over every filing. Behind the scenes, insurers negotiated. Confidential settlements were reached, details were sealed. Money changed hands without public accounting. Some collectors recovered a portion of their losses, others did not. The gallery closed its doors in 2011, ending more than 160 years of operation. There was no reopening, no rebrand, no comeback. The silence where it once operated became its final statement. For the art world, the closure landed hard. This was not a fringe operation collapsing under obvious fraud. This was a cornerstone institution falling under the weight of its own assumptions. Museums quietly reassessed their holdings. Works connected to the scheme were removed from view. Labels were rewritten. Loans were declined. Some institutions issued careful statements acknowledging the situation without assigning blame. Experts faced their own reckoning. Several art historians and scholars had given informal opinions on the paintings early on. Those opinions, often qualified and private, had later been cited as endorsements. The gap between what had been said and how it had been used became a point of embarrassment and anger. The case exposed how expertise functions in practice. Opinions are often delivered conversationally, without expectation of legal consequence. In this environment, uncertainty is softened to maintain relationships. That softness proved costly. Authentication practices came under scrutiny. The reliance on visual analysis, especially when unsupported by documentation, was no longer defensible. Scientific testing, once considered optional or intrusive, began to be framed as essential, but change moved slowly. The art market is not regulated like securities or commodities. There is no central authority, no mandatory disclosure standards. Provenance can remain partial. Deals can remain private. Silence can remain profitable. The Knoedler case did not rewrite those rules. It exposed their absence. Collectors, especially those entering the market through private sales, faced an uncomfortable truth. Prestige does not equal protection. Price does not equal proof. Even the most established names can fail basic verification when incentives align against skepticism. Some buyers admitted privately that they had ignored doubts. Others insisted they had been misled at every step. The distinction mattered less than the outcome. The paintings were worthless. Insurance claims covered some losses, lawsuits covered others, reputation covered none. For Rosala's sentencing reflected cooperation and scale. She received a reduced prison term, followed by supervised release. The punishment acknowledged her central role, but it did not address the broader system that enabled her. For the painter who fled, there was no public reckoning. His role remained partially obscured by distance and jurisdiction. He did not testify. He did not explain his motivations in court. The works he produced were reduced to exhibits and footnotes. The absence of a single villain frustrated observers. There was no mastermind operating alone, no genius forger outsmarting the world. Instead, there was a network of choices. A gallery chose not to demand invasive testing. Experts chose caution over confrontation. Buyers chose trust over verification. An intermediary chose profit over truth. A painter chose compliance over consequence. Each decision taken alone could be rationalized. Together, they produced one of the most damaging art frauds in modern history. Years later, the case still circulates in professional training and legal discussions. It is cited as a warning, a lesson, a turning point. But its impact is uneven. Some practices have tightened. Scientific testing is more common in high-value transactions. Written disclaimers are more explicit. Due diligence language has become sharper, yet the underlying incentives remain. Rarity still drives price, mystery still sells, prestige still quiets doubt. The final cost of the Knoedler forgeries cannot be measured only in dollars. It lives in the erosion of confidence between buyers, experts, and institutions. It lingers in every quiet transaction where a story feels just convincing enough. The paintings themselves no longer matter. They hang nowhere. They signify nothing. What matters is what they revealed. That in a market built on trust, the most dangerous material is not paint or paper. It is belief left untested.